I'm Margaret Walker, 40 years old, and the night my sister-in-law pointed at me and said, "Pay for it," every head at the table turned waiting. The candles flickered. Laughter caught in the air, and not one person, not my husband, not even my mother-in-law, said a word in my defense. I could feel the linen napkin in my lap, my hands trembling just enough to notice, and right then I realized the whole room expected me to give in. By the time the waiter arrived, my heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was quiet, and I knew something in me had changed for good. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever wondered what it feels like to finally choose yourself. I grew up in a small town just outside Des Moines, the kind of place where neighbors checked on each other and no one locked their front doors unless a storm was coming. My parents taught me to take care of what you have, to share what you can, and to never let pride stand in the way of kindness. We didn't have a lot, but there was always enough food, enough patience, enough love to go around. When I met Stephen Walker, his world felt like the opposite of mine. The Walkers were all about appearances, big parties, matching table settings, everything polished until it shined. They sent holiday cards printed on thick, glossy paper and hired live music for birthdays. It was the kind of family I thought would make me feel safe, like I'd finally found a place where things were secure and certain. But as the years went by, I started noticing the cracks, the little ways I was always just on the edge of things, no matter how hard I tried. At first it was small. My name left off the invitation for brunch and extra place setting, missing at Thanksgiving jokes about my practical taste when I brought a homemade dessert. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself that every family had their own rhythms and that sooner or later I'd settle in. I stayed late after parties to help clean up, picked up gifts for birthdays, handled last-minute reservations, because I always had a knack for details. I told myself that if I just kept showing up, if I did enough, I'd become one of them. But the truth is, every gesture was a test, and every time I said yes, the requests grew. The first time I picked up the check at dinner, it felt generous. The next time it felt expected. Before long, nobody asked. They just looked at me, and I paid. Stephen would squeeze my hand under the table and mouth thank you. But those moments faded too. Eventually, it was just me and the bill again and again, surrounded by laughter that never quite included me. I stopped noticing the little hurts and started counting the big ones. The night Stephen's mother brushed off my gift as thoughtful but not quite her style. The family trip where my reservation was forgotten, and I spent the night on a pull-out couch. The holidays where I wrapped presents well past midnight for a tree that never had a single box with my name on it. Through it all, I told myself that belonging was just around the corner if I could just hold on a little longer. So when my sister-in-law's words cut through the noise, "Pay for it," now I looked around and realized I was the only one surprised. The laughter echoed, the expectation hung heavy, and suddenly the years of shrinking myself to fit at their table caught up to me. What happened next changed everything, but to understand why you need to know the price I'd already paid. The first time I picked up the check, it was for Stephen's birthday dinner. His parents had chosen a steakhouse downtown, the kind with high ceilings and waiters in crisp shirts. When the bill arrived, Stephen's father made a joke about how the new generation should start the tradition, and everyone laughed. I smiled, pulled out my card, and didn't think much of it. It felt like the kind of gesture a family would remember something that meant I belonged. But it happened again a few weeks later, and then again after that. At first, Stephen would whisper, "Thank you," as we left, squeezing my hand in the back seat of his mother's car. Then even that stopped. Every time someone forgot a wallet or the check landed at our end of the table, the conversation would slow, and all eyes would find mine. Sometimes my sister-in-law Jessica would say, "You're always so organized, Margaret," or, "You know how these things work better than any of us." It was light and teasing, but over time the words started to feel like instructions instead of compliments. It didn't stop with dinners. When the holidays rolled around, I found myself buying group gifts on behalf of the whole family, placing online orders for spa days or theater tickets, and keeping track of who owed what, though somehow nobody ever paid me back. Jessica started adding me to hotel reservations for their weekend getaways, saying it was just easier that way. I'd cover deposits, flights, and sometimes even the full cost of a trip. She'd send a text, "Hope you don't mind, Margaret. We're just in a rush," and I'd say yes, thinking maybe next time someone else would step in. My hope didn't last long. Even when I was promoted at work and my name showed up in a business journal, nobody at the Walker table said a word. That night, as the conversation drifted around me, Stephen checked his phone and nodded along with his sister's stories, and his parents talked about a new renovation for their home. I waited, thinking maybe someone would notice, maybe someone would say, "Congratulations." The only thing anyone handed me that night was the bill. After that, it became a pattern I couldn't ignore. Jessica would make a show of searching through her purse for a missing card. Her husband would accidentally leave his wallet at home. And Stephen's mother would tap the table and sigh about all these expenses. No one asked if it was all right. They just assumed I would pay because I always had. If I hesitated, the mood would turn awkward, like I was ruining something sacred. Stephen, for his part, never pushed back. Sometimes he'd rub his thumb along my wrist under the table, but he didn't say anything to his family, not once. There were other moments, too. At Thanksgiving, they set out 6 place cards, but I was asked to help in the kitchen. I carved the turkey-plated desserts and made sure the table looked perfect, but my spot was at the counter, not at the table. Stephen's mother would say things like, "You're so good at making everyone feel special, Margaret," or "We'd be lost without you." But she never said thank you. When it was time for family photos, I was the one holding the camera. When they posted pictures online, I wasn't in a single one. It stung, but I tried to brush it off. I remembered how my parents taught me that family meant showing up and pitching in, not keeping score. So I told myself this was just the Walker way, and if I stayed patient, they'd see I belonged. I started keeping small lists in my phone reminders of gifts to buy or cards to send, but the lists grew longer with every season. Each time a new expense popped up, nobody hesitated to send it my way. Then there were the little humiliations. The time Stephen's mother opened the gift I bought for her, an expensive handbag she'd mentioned once, and smiled saying it's a nice imitation. Or the weekend in Chicago, when the hotel had only booked enough rooms for the others, and I ended up on the pull-out sofa in Jessica's suite, listening to everyone laugh about how easygoing I was. When I got the flu and canceled on brunch, nobody called to check in. But when I missed baking cupcakes for Jessica's daughter's birthday, I got a text, "Wow, thanks for bailing. Real classy." By then I'd stopped expecting gratitude. The requests never slowed. If there was a wedding shower, I was the one who made centerpieces, ordered catering, and paid the deposit. If a cousin needed help with college tuition, Jessica would text me late at night asking if I could front the money just until next month. I never said no because each time I said yes, I thought I was earning my place. All I earned was another request and a little less of myself. At home, I tried to talk to Stephen about setting boundaries. He'd listen quietly, then tell me his family just had their own way of doing things. "Don't take it personally," he'd say. "They don't mean anything by it." He never offered to cover the expenses, never spoke up when his sister made jokes about me being so good with numbers. It was always easier to go along than to make a scene. I started keeping track of everything. Not just in my head, but in a spreadsheet hidden on my laptop date event amount. Who benefited? 3 years, 78 dinners, dozens of parties, and vacation deposits, all there in black and white. The number stared back at me impossibly high. I felt tired, not angry when I looked at it. The giving had become a habit, and the habit had become an expectation. There was no big argument, no single moment where I snapped. It was a slow erosion day by day, meal by meal, until I realized I had started shrinking around them. I smiled less, laughed less, stopped volunteering for things I once loved. Every time I reached for my wallet, it felt a little heavier. I began to dread family gatherings, not because I didn't care, but because I knew what was coming. When Jessica's text popped up asking me to cover the wine tab for her parents' anniversary party, I said yes out of habit, not generosity. I watched myself fade from their stories and their photos. I became the helper, the organizer, the person who made things easier for everyone else. But the more I gave, the less I felt seen. Still, I told myself, just make it through the next event. Maybe after this dinner or the next holiday, things would be different. Maybe one day someone would notice how much I'd done. Maybe someone would say thank you. The night Jessica raised her voice at the table and told me to pay for everyone's meal, I realized I was the only one who hadn't stopped hoping. The laughter at my expense was just the last in a long line of quiet humiliations. But even then, I sat there a moment longer, waiting for someone else to step in. No one did. That was the moment I finally started to see what was happening, even if I wasn't sure yet what to do about it. I gathered my things in silence, the echo of their laughter still hanging in the air, and left the restaurant knowing the next time the bill came, something would have to change. I didn't say anything as I left the restaurant that night. The air was cool, and the city lights reflected in the puddles along the sidewalk, turning every step into a silent memory. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel, the echo of Jessica's laughter settling into the back of my mind. At home, I moved quietly, hanging up my coat, putting my purse in its usual place, and sitting for a long time at the edge of the bed. Stephen was already asleep, one hand draped over his chest, as if he hadn't noticed anything was wrong. I sat there listening to the gentle hum of the heater, wondering how I had become invisible in a house that was supposed to be my own. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds and I made coffee in silence. I set out 2 mugs, poured one for Stephen, and waited for him to come in. He did eventually, half awake and distracted already talking about work. I watched him move through our kitchen, opening cabinets, grabbing cereal, not once looking in my direction. I thought about saying something, just a few words, maybe about last night, but I let it pass. Instead, I cleaned up the kitchen and went about my day trying to shake the feeling that I was fading a little more each hour. Over the next few weeks, I kept to myself. Family group chats came and went, filled with plans for Sunday dinners and baby showers, and I did what I always did, said yes to every request. I picked up cupcakes, made centerpieces, arranged carpools. My phone filled up with reminders, shopping lists, and notes about who liked which kind of wine or which niece needed a ride home. When I caught a cold and texted to say I couldn't make brunch, nobody replied. Not one person called to check if I was okay, but the following week, Jessica messaged me about missing the cupcakes, ending with hope. You feel better soon, almost as an afterthought. Holidays rolled in, each one blending into the next. I found myself wrapping gifts late into the night, double-checking that everyone's name was spelled right on every tag. On Christmas Eve, Stephen's mother complimented the decorations, and Jessica laughed about me being so organized. I smiled, but I noticed the pile of presents under the tree, none with my name. After dinner, the family gathered for photos, and I stayed behind the camera taking the pictures instead of standing with them. Small moments stood out sharper than before. A forgotten birthday invitation, a last-minute request for party supplies. Stephen would rub his neck when I brought it up, always saying, "That's just how they are, Margaret. Don't take it to heart." He meant well, I think, but the words didn't help. I went back to the spreadsheet I'd started, a secret tally of every dinner, every gift, every deposit or hotel room. I looked at the numbers, but they didn't make me angry. They made me tired. I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked if I wanted to be included or thanked me for making things run smoothly. I kept going to the gatherings. I kept paying the bills. I kept answering every text, handling every detail. At night, I'd sit in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep that never came easily. Stephen sometimes reached for my hand, but there was a distance in the room, quiet and steady. One morning, I realized I hadn't heard my own laughter in weeks. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the tired woman looking back. Work became my place of refuge. At the office, people called me by name. My boss stopped by my desk to ask for my opinion, and coworkers brought me coffee just because. Some evenings I stayed late, not for the workload, but for the comfort of feeling seen. Even then, when I came home, I fell right back into my old routines, answering group texts, planning family meals, updating the spreadsheet after another payment cleared. The strain started to show in other ways. I withdrew from friends I'd once been close to. Invitations to dinner or movies sat unanswered on my phone. I couldn't bring myself to explain what was happening, not because I was ashamed, but because the words felt too heavy to say out loud. I moved through my days quietly, feeling more like a shadow than a person doing everything I could to keep from making waves. One night as I was sorting receipts for yet another Walker family dinner, I noticed Stephen watching me. He asked if I needed help, but I shook my head. He sat down beside me silent for a while, then said, "You're always doing so much for us. I know they don't always show it." He squeezed my shoulder and stood up to go to bed. I sat alone at the kitchen table, wishing I could believe him. I started to question things I'd always accepted. Why was it that no matter how hard I tried, I was still on the outside looking in? Why did my kindness seem to make me less visible, not more? When did generosity become a requirement, not a choice? The questions circled my mind at night, making it harder to sleep, harder to show up at the next family event with a smile. Spring came, and the invitations started again, dinners, parties, another wedding to help plan. Each time I said yes, but my heart wasn't in it. The spreadsheet grew longer, the hours felt heavier. Sometimes I caught Stephen watching me worry in his eyes, but we never talked about it. At a family barbecue, Jessica made a joke about me being the family accountant and everyone laughed. I pretended to laugh too, but it didn't reach my eyes. There was no one moment that made it all clear, just a slow realization that I had become invisible to the people I was trying so hard to please. I had given so much, and in return, I had faded into the background of their lives. The silence wasn't just around me. It was inside me, growing stronger, with every unspoken hurt, every thankless task, every bill paid without acknowledgement. On a Sunday night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in the kitchen and let the quiet settle over me. The dishwasher hummed, the house was still, and for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder what it would feel like to stop, to let go of the need to prove myself, to choose something different, even if I didn't know what that would look like. That thought stayed with me. It was small at first, a whisper I tried to ignore, but as the days passed, it grew louder. I started saying no quietly under my breath just to hear the sound. No, I don't have to cover the bill. No, I don't need to organize the next party. No, I don't have to stay invisible to be accepted. I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but I knew the moment was coming. The next time the Walker family called, I took a deep breath before answering, feeling something shift inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. I carried that quiet, no around with me for days, turning it over like a smooth stone in my pocket. There was no plan, no big speech. It was just a thought at first, a question that wouldn't let go. If I stopped doing, would anybody notice? If I stopped paying, stopped planning, would there be anything left for me? I moved through the house in my usual way, folding laundry, answering work emails, listening to the clock tick in the living room, and every so often I'd hear that word again a little clearer than before. One evening, I was at my laptop sorting through old files when I clicked open the spreadsheet. The rows and columns looked endless, 3 years' worth of receipts, numbers, and names. I scrolled down to the very bottom, the total almost daring me to look it in the eye. Nearly $98,000, line by line, event by event, a sum that seemed impossible when you looked at it all together. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, remembering the dinners, the plane tickets, the gifts, all the small silent ways I'd tried to earn a seat at their table. The phone buzzed beside me. Jessica was asking about the wine for her parents' vow renewal dinner. "You can handle the bill again, right? No greeting, no please, no thank you." I read her message twice, then set my phone aside and closed the laptop. That night, as Stephen got ready for bed, I watched him brush his teeth, his back turned to me. I waited for him to ask if I was all right, but he didn't. I thought about saying something about showing him the spreadsheet, but the words stayed stuck in my throat. I folded my robe, turned out the light, and lay awake for hours listening to the quiet of our apartment. A few days later, I found myself in the wine aisle, the cart filling up with bottles for the big event. I stood there for a long time, running my hand along the labels, trying to remember if anyone even liked Pinot Noir, or if that was just something I'd always assumed. I thought about how easy it would be to buy whatever they wanted, how simple it would be to do what was expected. But the spreadsheet lingered in my mind, a silent question, growing louder by the hour. The night of the vow renewal, I got dressed in black, chose flats instead of heels, and pulled my hair back. Stephen was quiet on the way downtown, adjusting his tie, glancing at me but not really seeing me. The restaurant glowed with candles and laughter, long tables crowded with family and friends. I found my place at the far end, pouring water for myself, while the others clinked glasses and told stories. The meal stretched on steak lobster slices of cake, and I moved through it all as if I were somewhere else, watching my own life from a distance. During the toasts, Jessica made a show of thanking everyone who'd helped with the event. She listed each family member, her voice bright and cheerful, never once mentioning my name. When the waiter arrived with the bill, Jessica reached for it, raised an eyebrow at the total, and held it up for everyone to see. "Who knew love cost so much?" she joked. Then she turned to me and said, "Margaret, pay for it now." The words landed like a stone in a still pond, sending out quiet ripples that touched every person at the table. Nobody spoke. I felt all the eyes on me. I didn't move for a long moment. I reached into my purse, but instead of my wallet, I pulled out a white envelope, thick with printed pages. I slid it across the table, my hands steady. "You want me to pay?" I said, my voice even. "Let's talk about what I've already paid." Jessica laughed, but nobody else joined her. I watched as she opened the envelope, her fingers slowing as she flipped through the pages. Line after line, the numbers filled the space between us. Dinners, trips, gifts, tuition, every dollar spent for the family that never saw me. Stephen looked at me wide-eyed and silent. His mother set down her glass, her lips pressed tight. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the truth settle over the table, heavy and real. "You've treated me like a bank," I said quietly. "Not family. I've let it happen. But I'm done." I picked up my purse, looked around the room, and met every eye that dared to look back. "This was going to be my gift to you," I told Stephen's mother, nodding at the unopened box on the table. "But now I'm keeping it." I straightened my jacket, took a last breath of candlelight and perfume, and walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. At the door, I paused and turned. By the way I said just loud enough for them all to hear, I booked this restaurant. The deposit was non-refundable. "So you've already used me tonight. Congratulations." I stepped outside into the cool night air, the sound of their stunned silence following me all the way to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just started the engine ready to drive anywhere the road would take me. And as the city lights blurred past, I felt a quiet certainty growing in my chest. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't be going back to the life I had before. I drove through the city in silence, the sound of tires on wet pavement grounding me more than anything that had happened at that table. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady and calm, while streetlights painted gold lines across the dash. For years I'd wondered what it would feel like to just walk away. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet, like a sigh I'd been holding in for too long. At home, I undressed slowly, dropped the black dress and heels in a donation bag, and made myself a cup of tea. I sat on the floor, knees drawn close steam, curling up in the soft light of my living room. The envelope of receipts was still in my purse, unopened, as if even I needed proof that the night had happened. My phone was silent until the sun came up. That's when the calls started. Stephen was the first 6 missed calls, a string of texts, one after the other. He didn't say sorry, just asked me to talk. Then his mother, her message clipped and sharp, told me I'd embarrassed the family. Jessica wrote next, calling me dramatic, as if nothing I'd done could possibly be justified. I didn't answer. I made breakfast, washed the dishes, opened the curtains, and let the morning light fill the room. By noon, Stephen was outside my door, knocking gently. I watched the shadow of his shoes beneath the door frame and listened to him slide a note through the mail slot. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" was all he wrote. I folded the note, left it on the kitchen counter, and sat by the window, the quiet more comforting than any apology. That weekend, I took stock of what was left in our joint accounts and transferred my savings into a separate account, then deactivated the family card I'd used for all those group expenses. I emailed my boss and asked for a week off, not to travel or do anything special, but just to have a stretch of days where nobody needed me to fix or pay for anything. When I finished, I put on an old sweater and went for a walk, breathing in the late winter air. It felt clean, and I noticed the way my shoulders relaxed, how my hands no longer reached for my phone every few minutes. Stephen sent one more message late Sunday. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I'm sorry. I should have protected you." I stared at those words for a long time, tracing each letter with my thumb, searching for the old hope I used to feel. But nothing stirred. Not relief. Not anger, just quiet. I closed the message, left my phone face down, and sat in the silence I'd earned. The days that followed were slow and soft. No one called to ask for money. No one demanded my time. I woke up when I wanted, poured coffee and listened to jazz in the kitchen, the notes rising and falling without the weight of anyone's expectations. My apartment felt bigger, warmer. I met up with friends I hadn't seen in months, women who'd once told me I'd changed since marrying into the Walker family. I'd brushed off their words before, but now I listened grateful for the laughter and the easy conversation. There was no pressure to split the bill, no sidelong glances across the table. We just enjoyed each other's company, and I remembered how good that could feel. On a whim, I booked a weekend trip to Sedona. I packed light, hiked alone, slept beneath a sky crowded with stars, and wrote in a journal I hadn't touched in years. In the quiet of the desert, I realized how much I'd given up to belong to a family that never saw me. All the small pieces of myself I'd handed over, believing they would finally call me their own. The desert wind carried those thoughts away, and I let them go, feeling lighter as each day passed. When I got home, there was a final message from Stephen. "I've started therapy. You were right. I let them control everything, even me." For the first time, his words didn't sound like a plea or an excuse. He wished me well, and I left it at that. Healing. I learned didn't require forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it just meant choosing peace. I cleared out the last of the old emails and deleted the spreadsheet from my computer. I made a quiet promise to myself from now on, my energy would be spent building something that mattered to me. That's how I started a small, anonymous foundation. Nothing public, just financial coaching for women who felt trapped by money and silence the way I once had. I didn't mention it to the walkers. I didn't need anyone's blessing. The holidays came and went. I didn't get an invitation, not even a card. For the first time, I didn't wait for one. My new world was smaller, but it fit just right. I filled my days with work, laughter, and small acts of kindness that had nothing to do with earning my place. I was learning slowly that I could give without losing myself. As spring returned and the days grew longer, I found myself looking forward, not back. There was no plan, no big gesture, just a quiet life full of things I chose for myself. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. The weeks after that night felt strangely quiet. My days were slow, filled with small routines, a walk through the park in the morning, a cup of coffee by the kitchen window, sorting through the stack of unopened mail that had gathered by the door. The phone rang less often, and when it did, I let it go to voicemail. I found myself listening to the rhythm of the neighborhood again, the sound of dogs barking down the street, the low hum of a lawnmower, the neighbors' wind chimes tinkling whenever a breeze passed through. I had lived here for years and never realized how peaceful it could be when nobody was asking for anything. Stephen reached out a few more times, his messages less urgent now, each one shorter than the last. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. He never asked me to come home. He didn't bring up the family, didn't mention Jessica or his mother. I could hear the tiredness in his voice on the rare occasions I picked up. Once he said, "It's quiet here, too." There wasn't anything left to say. The distance between us had settled in long before I'd ever packed a bag. I started sleeping better, waking with the sun instead of an alarm. Sometimes I'd lie in bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the birds and letting the light fill the room. I let go of the need to plan every detail, to anticipate every request. For the first time in years, my days belonged only to me. I picked up old hobbies, reading mysteries late into the night, taking long walks with no destination, trying new recipes just because they sounded good. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes, stopped waiting for the next demand or crisis. The world felt bigger somehow with all that empty space. I heard bits of news from the walkers through mutual friends and the occasional forwarded email. Jessica had tried to organize another family dinner, but the group chat fizzled out when nobody volunteered to take care of the details. Stephen's mother tried to plan a birthday party, but she ended up double booking the restaurant and sending the invitations to the wrong address. I imagined the confusion, the awkward apologies, the realization that the glue holding everything together was gone. I didn't feel satisfaction or regret. It just was. Work grew busier, and I found a new rhythm there as well. My coworkers noticed the change. "You seem lighter," one said, "like you're not carrying the whole world anymore." I smiled and kept the details to myself. At lunch, I listened to stories about grandchildren and vacations, small troubles and small joys. The office became a place I looked forward to, a world where my efforts were seen and valued. One evening after a late meeting, I stopped at a cafe on the way home. The woman behind the counter complimented my earrings and asked if I wanted the blueberry scone before they closed. I sat by the window, watching the last of the daylight fade, and realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had done something kind for me without expecting anything in return. I finished my tea, paid the bill, and walked home beneath a sky full of stars. As the days stretched into weeks, Stephen and I exchanged a few more messages. He told me he was seeing a therapist. I'm trying to untangle everything he wrote. I'm sorry I let them push you aside. I'm sorry I let myself disappear too. I read his words, letting them settle without answering right away. There was nothing to fix, nothing to repair. We both knew that. Eventually, we met one last time to sign the papers. It was a gray, rainy Tuesday, the kind where the air feels heavy and the world seems quieter than usual. We sat at the lawyer's office side by side, filling out forms and answering questions in low voices. When it was done, Stephen handed me the pen and said, "You were always stronger than any of us." I nodded, slipped the folder into my purse, and stood. There were no angry words, no accusations. Just a quiet ending, the two of us walking away in different directions beneath a sky thick with clouds. Back home, I made dinner for one, lighting a single candle on the table. I put on music not to set a mood for anyone else, but just because I liked it. Later that night, I opened the windows and let the cool air in, listening to the world settle around me. The old tension was gone. In its place was a gentle emptiness, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. There was still more to learn, more to rebuild. But for now, I had what I needed: a roof overhead, a quiet heart, and a future that belonged to me. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought of the coming days not with dread, but with a cautious kind of hope. Soon enough, life would offer new beginnings, and I was ready at last to claim them. The days after the divorce were quiet and steady. The phone calls stopped. The emails from the Walkers faded until they disappeared altogether. I'd expected anger or blame, maybe even some attempt at an explanation, but nothing came. The house felt different, lighter, as if a heavy coat had finally been shrugged off. Each morning, I settled into new habits. I brewed strong coffee, opened the blinds, and let the sunrise fill my small kitchen with pale gold. The world felt more my own than it had in years. I spent my free time meeting friends for breakfast or taking slow walks by the lake, watching the light move across the water. Sometimes I passed neighbors who stopped to chat about nothing in particular, and for the first time in a long while, I had the energy to really listen. I read library books in the afternoon sun and planted herbs on my windowsill, trimming the basil and mint, watching tiny green leaves reach for the light. There was a gentleness to these days, a steadiness that grew stronger each week. In the evenings, I worked quietly on the foundation I'd started, creating a safe space for women to talk about money, about feeling small, about finding ways forward. Calls and emails arrived sometimes from strangers who'd heard about the program, sometimes from women I'd met years before who remembered how careful I'd been with details. The work was quiet, never loud or public, but it felt right. Each story reminded me that I hadn't been alone in my struggle and that healing could start in small, practical ways. One Saturday morning, as I was setting up for a workshop, my phone buzzed. It was Stephen. His message was brief. "Thank you for showing me what I couldn't see. I hope you're well." I read it, then put the phone away. I looked around at the table set with coffee mugs and notepads, sunlight falling through the windows. I didn't feel the old weight of responsibility, just a sense of calm. The days when I measured my worth by what I could give were behind me. The holidays came and went without a single card or call from the Walkers. Instead, I spent Thanksgiving at a friend's house helping to mash potatoes and set the table, laughing with people who welcomed me just as I was. At Christmas, I cooked a simple meal for myself and delivered cookies to the neighbors next door. There were no big gestures or sweeping moments, just quiet hours filled with warmth and gratitude. One afternoon in early spring, as I was walking along the lake shore, a woman stopped me. She admired my earrings and said, "You look like someone who's found her peace." I thanked her, and we shared a smile, then went our separate ways. That small exchange stayed with me the rest of the day like a light left on in a window. I no longer waited for invitations or worried about being left out. My life was smaller now, but it fit me. I chose the people I let in the places I spent my time, the things I gave my heart to. The world had shifted, and I had shifted with it, finding comfort not in what I could provide, but in simply being myself. I settled into my new home by the water, a place with sun-warmed wood floors, a quiet kitchen, and a view of the lake that always seemed to catch the afternoon light. The days felt gentle and unhurried. I learned to cook for myself again, trying recipes that didn't need to impress anyone. Just bring me a little comfort at the end of the day. I planted rosemary and mint on the windowsill, watched the green shoots reach for the sun, and realized how good it felt to create something simply because I wanted to. There were mornings when I'd walk along the shoreline, feeling the breeze and the warmth of the sun on my shoulders. The world felt smaller, but it fit me now. I wasn't waiting for an invitation or a sign of approval. I chose where I went, who I spent time with, and how I gave of myself. Sometimes I'd think back to the old days, the laughter that wasn't meant for me, the endless dinners where my place was always just outside the circle. But those memories faded into the background, softer and less sharp, replaced by quieter joys, good neighbors, new friends, and simple moments that felt honest and true. Stephen and I crossed paths just once by chance in the grocery store. He gave me a small, understanding smile, and I nodded back. There was nothing left to say, no anger or regret, just two people who had moved on. The Walkers never reached out, and I no longer wondered what they thought or said about me. The old longing to be included was gone, replaced by something steadier, a sense of belonging to myself. As the seasons changed, so did I. My work with the foundation grew one phone call at a time, each conversation a quiet reminder of how many people had felt unseen, unheard, or taken for granted. I listened. I shared what I'd learned, and together we found small ways forward. Every day I was reminded that you don't have to give yourself away to be kind or strong, that boundaries can be an act of love too. There's a lesson I carry with me now, a quiet truth I wish I'd known sooner. Being the one who always pays doesn't mean you're valued, it just means you're available. Real worth comes from knowing when to give, when to hold back, and when to walk away with your dignity intact. It's not selfish to choose your own well-being. It's an act of courage, especially when you've spent years believing that love is something you have to buy. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible at someone else's table, I hope you'll remember that you deserve to belong exactly as you are, not for what you can give, but for who you are. Take care of yourself. Leave a note in the comments if you'd like, or share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, I hope you'll join me again next time. You're always welcome here.